Welcome to Trinity Radio. I'm Dr. Braxton Hunter, and today we are going to be continuing in a series through the book of Genesis. But don't go away, because if this is the first video in the series you've seen, you can watch it as a standalone episode. Now, you can also go to the playlist at youtube.com/BraxtonHunter, and you can watch all of the videos through the book of Genesis there, or you can go to trinityradio.org and you can select on the tab for verse by verse, and you can listen to them there as audio-only episodes. And I hope that you'll consider doing that. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to continue the story of Joseph dealing with his brothers. For those that don't know the story, Joseph was done wrong by his brothers in such a way that resulted in his ending up in Egypt, but he did so well there in Egypt. He was such a man of integrity, such a man of usefulness, that as a result, he has gone to the top of the food chain pretty well and is the right-hand man to Pharaoh himself. In fact, speaks with the authority of Pharaoh. So he's the most powerful man in all the land except for Pharaoh himself. And this is a pretty amazing thing. Speaks to the power, control, and sovereignty of God over our lives, providence of God over our lives. And this is obviously something we can take comfort in. And we're going to continue that story today, even though I've already gestured toward the end of the story in a previous video. But what I want you to know is that when we look at narrative texts like this one, historical sort of texts, it's telling us what happened. It doesn't always necessarily tell us what we should take away from this. Sometimes it does. So we're left sometimes wondering, well, what's the lesson exactly? Or what are all the lessons we could take away from something like this? And I think there is one in this passage, something practical for your life. And that is that the mercy of God and the relief, the feeling of relief that comes with the realization of that mercy. This is an important thing for us to talk about. Perhaps you've been the kind of person who has prayed and begged God, Lord, please don't let X happen, whatever X is, or please let Y happen. And then when it happens, when God answers that prayer, however he answers that prayer, and perhaps you deserved something, you messed up, and God could leave you to face the results, the consequences of your sin, but he shows you mercy in some way. We pray and pray and pray for that to happen. But when it happens, this occurred to me even when I was a teenager, how often I don't thank God. I prayed and begged for God to do a particular thing, but then I didn't thank God for that. And we ought to be people who are thankful and give prayers of thanksgiving to God when he does that sort of thing for us. Before we jump right into it, one theological or philosophical or even apologetic issue that should be considered is if I'm going to talk about mercy and relief as themes in this text that we're going to look at today, then what that means is that I need to address the question of how God can be both just and merciful at the same time. You know, it's not uncommon for skeptics to say, well, wait a minute, you say that God is all just. God must act justly. This is why what happened in Canaan. This is why the flood. This is why a lot of things. This is why hell. This is why individuals will end up going to hell if they don't know the Lord Jesus Christ. And the reason is because they will face the penalty for their sin. This is justice, and God must act justly. But that's true in the Old and the New Testament. I think sometimes we look at the Old Testament God and we say, I don't know how he could be both just and loving. But he can. Now, the challenge is, number one, God doesn't necessarily look very merciful and loving to people in the Old Testament. Then at the same time, God, how could God even be merciful if he's going to be just? Because mercy is taken by many people to mean, and surely definitions go about it this way, to suspend the justice that could be brought in order to show that mercy. Well, let's talk about that for just a moment, because I don't necessarily think that's the case. It was brought up in the debate between Stephen Woodford and Justin Brierley a couple of years ago when they had a debate. But here's the thing. When you look at this, God must act justly, and the penalty for sin is death. However, in our individualistic 21st century day in which we live, we think about me paying my own sins or me paying my own debts and all these. It's all about me as an individual. And of course, there are things that are true about the individual in the Bible, of course, even in this realm that we're discussing right now. But at the same time, in the biblical world, you had, the way the biblical authors thought about it, you had these federal heads, individuals who represented groups of people. If you don't know Christ, you're in Adam. If you do know Christ, you're in Christ. This is the language of Ephesians, for example. And so you have these federal heads that represent the group that you're in. Well, one of the amazing things is this federal head can actually take actions on behalf of the group. And Jesus, becoming mankind, died on behalf of mankind. So God becomes man, and Jesus is able to take the punishment for mankind by dying on the cross and shedding his blood for the sin of the world. Now, if you're wondering, well, then why doesn't universalism result? And why isn't everybody just automatically saved, since Jesus died on behalf of humanity as a man to die on behalf of mankind? The notion that is held among people like me who do not believe in what is called limited atonement is that the gift has been provided, the sacrifice has been provided, but you have to actualize it for yourself. A good example of this might be something like, a good example, the examples are always going to have holes in them, but perhaps something like you won a sweepstakes in which a car was placed in your name, and it was even driven and placed in your driveway. Well, the car is yours and it sits right out there, but until you get in it and turn on the engine, you are not the driver of that car. And you don't enjoy the benefits of having that car, even though it's been done for you. And this is what we would say that the death of Christ is like. Nevertheless, that system, the Mosaic system, what it pictured, and then the actual death of Christ, this whole system where sins can be forgiven, the system is a mercy. The justice is still being done. It's just being done on your behalf. But the system itself is a mercy. It's merciful. And in this way, God is just, but he is also merciful. And so both of those things can happen in a beautiful way. And it reflects our God of love and mercy. And what I'd like you to think about as you move into this section is perhaps you've been like I have at times, where you've looked at the Old Testament and perhaps you had things in your mind about what people say about it, or perhaps some of what God does obviously is not pleasant, it's not appealing to our senses. And as a result, you might say, well, if that's how God functions with his people in the Old Testament, I don't know that he'd show me mercy for the things that I've done. But understand that the God of the Old Testament is the God of the New Testament. He is said to be a God of love. Even in the book of Deuteronomy, he's a God of love. And yet, here we have a situation where he shows mercy through Joseph to individuals who likely what they did is worse than something that you've done. But if not, even something such as that, to leave their brother for dead and to lie about it and to carry around that guilt for 20 years. This is still a situation where you've done something like that, God can show mercy to you. What God wants is a repentant heart, a merciful heart, a heart that begs for mercy, that wants mercy, that depends on him, is perhaps the best way to say it. As you think about that, consider what mercy really is and how powerful it can be in our lives. According to Today in the Word, October 8th, 1992, years after the death of President Calvin Coolidge, this story came to light. In the early days of his presidency, Coolidge awoke one morning in his hotel room to find a cat burglar going through his pockets. Imagine that. Imagine who this is, and the cat burglar is in his hotel room going through his pockets. Coolidge spoke up, asking the burglar not to take his watch chain because it contained an engraved charm he wanted to keep. Coolidge then engaged the thief in quiet conversation and discovered he was a college student who had no money to pay his hotel bill or buy a ticket back to campus. Coolidge counted $32 out of his own wallet, which he had also persuaded the dazed young man to give back to him. So he convinces him, give me my wallet. And he gives the kid $32. It was declared to be a loan, and he advised the young man to leave the way he had come so as to avoid the Secret Service. Yes, the loan was paid back. This was a display of mercy. And we see how powerful mercy is, not only when we're talking about these big theological issues, but in a very practical, everyday sort of way, we can see that the mercy there, the guy did pay it back, as the story goes. The mercy actually reformed the guy. So it had a powerful impact on his life as well. And of course, we see that in the story that we're going to look at today. So let's go ahead and jump in and look at it. All right, we're going to see some serious mercy here. All right, chapter 43 and verse 1 says, "Now the famine was severe in the land. So it came about when they had finished eating the grain which they had brought from Egypt, that their father said to them, 'Go back, buy us a little food.' Judah spoke to him, however, saying, 'The man sternly warned us.'" Now the man they're talking about is Joseph. "You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you," talking about Benjamin, the youngest brother. "If you send our brother with us, we will go down and buy you food. But if you do not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, 'You will not see my face unless your brother is with you.'" Now, what's going on here is, you'll recall that Joseph sent them on back. Simeon had to stay. Simeon had to stay, but the rest of them have gone back, and they went back with provisions. So now that those provisions are gone. So this has been quite a while. And now Jacob is seeing the writing on the wall, so to speak. He sees what's coming to happen, what's going to happen. We need food. We can't go on like this. You guys have to go get back and get more food. And they keep doubling down that, listen, we are not going back unless we can take Benjamin with us, because that guy said that he wasn't going to see us again unless we took Benjamin. And they're probably thinking that through Simeon in prison, through us in prison for 3 days, what's going to happen? Well, Jacob has already said, I'm not sending Benjamin back with you, because look what happened to Joseph, and then Simeon, you didn't come back with Simeon. I'm not going to send Benjamin with you now, even though we know all this is going to ultimately be restored. But that's what's going through his head. And then verse 6 says, then Israel said, that's Jacob, by the way, God changed Jacob's name to Israel. Why did you treat me so badly by telling the man whether you still had another brother? And why did you mention that you had a younger brother? You could have avoided this whole thing. Now, you may recall in the previous video, I mentioned that it could be that there was a need to explain how many people, or demonstrate how many people you needed food for by having as many of those people there as you could, because you could have a per capita distribution of food, and we might presume that your father's not going to come, but we want to know who all we're giving food for, because we can't just give you willy-nilly however much food you say you want, right? Well, it says later that it may not have appeared clear that, any evidence of that later, but here we are going to see the evidence that may well have been what happened. Verse 7, but they said, the man specifically asked about us and our relatives, right? Because, we know why Joseph is pushing this, but it wouldn't seem that odd to ask about someone's relatives, because we got to make sure we're giving the right amount of food for the people. Saying, is your father still alive? Have you another brother? This is what Joseph was asking them. So we answered his questions. Could we possibly know that he would say, bring your brother down? How would we know? We were just a little bit freaked out and trying to be honest. Now, some of the information that we get here is not contained in that conversation in the previous chapter. Now, that doesn't mean, when you see that in the Bible, that doesn't mean that there's some contradiction. There's no contradiction between these two texts. It's just that we didn't get everything that happened, and the author didn't give us all of that information. It could have been a summary, but here we're getting more of that information. All right, so verse 8. So Judah said to his father Israel, send the boy with me, and we will arise and go, so that we may live and not die, we as well as you and our little ones. I myself will take responsibility for him. You may demand him back from me. If I do not bring him back to you and present him to you, talking about Benjamin, then you can let me take the blame forever. For if we had not delayed, surely by now we could have returned twice. We could have already handled this, Dad. If you'll let me take him, I'll be the one that answers for this. I'll be ashamed forever if something happens. Then their father Israel said to them, if it must be so, then do this. Take some of the best products of the land in your bags. Now notice he's saying take some of the best products of the land. The land, what land? Canaanite products. Take some of the best products of the land in your bags and carry down to the man as a gift a little balsam and a little honey, labdanum, resin, and myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds. Now, these are things apparently that would have grown on the trees. When you have a situation, Steve Gregg pointed this out, I thought it made a good point, that even in a time of drought, you might have trees that bear some kind of nuts or things like that, or you could have honey, because the trees have a root system that goes down further, and so they can survive better in a famine than they might otherwise, than other things would. But there are a couple of things here. The myrrh and spices mentioned were likely imports from some other land and not from their land, and so these would have been costly. And so this was an attempt to say, hey, we're giving you what we've got from our land, but then also these nice things that we had as imports would be good. But notice about the things that they do have: honey, pistachio nuts, almonds, things like this. These are things that you could eat, and surely people living in the land would have eaten these things, but it wasn't like your main course. This is not your main sustenance. And so the idea that I want you to pick up from this is that during a famine, you could still, it's not that you had nothing to eat if you're where Jacob and his family were, but this is not a sustainable meal intake. Okay. Yeah, and so these people are probably trying to win. They're trying to win over Joseph, though they don't know that it's Joseph, by giving gifts like this. When we went to the Philippines in 2007, and we're there for a few weeks. One thing that we were told before we ever went was you're going to be visiting these people. And whether you're talking to the mayor of a particular town or some person who's a pastor in the area or whatever it is, or just a regular person living down the street, bring gifts. Because if you bring gifts, they love this stuff, they need this stuff. And then, of course, on top of that, it will ingratiate you to them such that they're more willing to listen to you. And this is not a form of manipulation. This is just being nice. This is just something that's been true throughout history. When you're encountering a new people group, it's good to give gifts, right? It's good to ingratiate yourself to people that way. And so when we went over there, we took hats. One of the things is they really like hats. Doesn't matter if that hat said Bob's Mechanic Shop, they like hats. They also like ink pens. And so one of the things that we did was someone had gotten a hold of a bunch of these ink pens that you could pull out like a shade, almost like it would wind back up, but you could pull it out and it would give the gospel story. So we would, use that and give it to them, and they could use that to reach other people for Christ. And we operated like that. And dignitaries that we met with, we'd give them a cap, Bob's Mechanic Shop, big deal. Here's a pen, Newburgh National Bank or something. It doesn't matter. You just give them these things. They love it. And it really works. Even with my children, I meant to have, because I've got in the room somewhere here, some things that my youngest daughter has made for me. Well, she gives me, my children give me gifts, and I think about those gifts even in moments where they've done something wrong, and I want to punish them. I make sure, I don't want to punish them, but I need to punish them in some way. Discipline them might be the better term. And so I don't want to do it, but I go to discipline them. Those gifts have softened my heart to them. The little cards that she'll make me, I miss you, Daddy, with glitter on it and all those kind of things. Gifts are powerful. And of course, we think about now, Jacob knows this trick. Why does Jacob know this trick? Because remember when Jacob was encountering Esau again, and it had been years, and now he's got his wife and his wives and his families and all these things, and he's heading out. Remember, he sent in waves gifts that Esau would encounter these great gifts, and then he'd go a little further and he'd encounter these great gifts, and it would soften his heart. And then, of course, when Jacob came, he bowed multiple times. Bowing, obviously important to this story as well, because it was a fulfillment of the dreams that Joseph had. So that's probably a lot to say about these gifts, but I think it's helpful. Verse 12, and take double the money, he tells them. So take gifts, take these things that we've got, and then take double the money in your hand, and take back in your hand the money that was returned in the opening of your sacks. Remember, they found out that their money had been put back in the sacks. So he's saying take double the amount of money, and perhaps it was a mistake, it says. Verse 13, take your brother also, and arise, return to the man, and may God Almighty grant you compassion in the sight of the man, so that he'll release to you your brother and Benjamin. And as for me, if I am bereaved of my sons, I am bereaved. In other words, what am I supposed to do? What am I going to do with this? I can't do anything with this. I'm stuck. I have to release Benjamin. That's the only choice. He doesn't want to do this, but this is something that he clearly feels that he has to do. Now, I was going to show you an image that I actually have that I'd have to find here real quickly, but I think I called it log walk. Here we go. Take a look at this image right here. You probably can't. I'll go over here. You probably can't see very well what's happening, but you see this log going across the river. If you follow that to the other end of the log, you'll see a man sitting there on the log. That man is me. And this picture was taken by my wife. Now, that is a redwood tree, not one of the real big ones. From our recent vacation, we went to the top of the famous Multnomah Falls, and I just had to be a boy and walk across this log. But there were other examples. My wife told me after this, you could have hurt yourself. We're at the beginning of our trip, and then we're not going to have a good trip. Later on, as the trip rolled on, I walked up some pretty high redwoods that were laid over like this. And I remember on one occasion looking back and thinking, I don't want to get a broken leg or something on this trip and ruin our trip, but I've got to get back down. And I thought the only way to get back down is the way I came up. and that's standing, walking down this log to the other end. And I thought, what am I going to do? I don't have any other options. This is the only way. And if I die, I die, but I've got to walk down this log. And of course, I'm fine. Here I am today with my cat-like reflexes and legendary balance. But what I want you to take away from this is how Joseph feels. Joseph is sitting here. What am I supposed to? I don't have any other options. There's only one way to go. I got to walk down that log. I got to send Benjamin along. And so that's what they do. And remember, he had said before he wouldn't do this. Verse 15. So the men took this gift, and they took double the money in their hand and Benjamin. Then they set out and went down to Egypt and stood before Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to his house steward, bring the men into the house and slaughter an animal and make preparations, for the men are to dine with me at noon. Verse 17. So the man did as Joseph said and brought the men to Joseph's house. Now, he's going to be kind to them here. He's actually going to be kind to them. But not that he doesn't have any tricks up his sleeve. He has at least one more trick up his sleeve. But he's going to be kind to them, but they don't know that. What have they said? This guy talked rough to us. This guy talked harshly to us. And so we've got to, they're not expecting him to be nice. Verse 18, now the men were afraid because they were brought to Joseph's house, and they said, it is because of the money that was returned in our sacks the first time that we are being brought in, so that he may attack us and overpower us and take us as slaves with our donkeys. So they approached Joseph's house steward. This is the guy that's in charge of Joseph's affairs, and spoke to him at the entrance of the house and said, oh, my Lord, we indeed came down the first time to buy food. And it happened when we came to the campsite that we opened our sacks, and behold, each man's money was in the opening of his sack. Our money in full. So we have brought it back in our hand. We have also brought down other money in our hand to buy food. We do not know who put our money in our sacks, but he said, peace be to you. Do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. Your money was in my possession. Then he brought Simeon out to them. Then the man brought the men into Joseph's house and gave them water. And they washed their feet, and he gave their donkeys feed. So they prepared the gift for Joseph's arrival at noon, for they had heard that they were to eat a meal there. So now we're going to just keep reading through the rest of this chapter here, and we're going to keep trucking. But the reason we're moving through a good deal of text here is because much of what's going to happen in the following chapters, though not all, is going to be in this story a recapitulation of discussions that have been had and what's really happened up to this point. And then after that, it's going to be administrative things and things like that that might not be the things we're most excited about, the climactic moments in the story. We're going to cover all of it, but we're going to move through a few chapters here today, and I just want you to know that. Verse 26, when Joseph came home, they brought into the house to him the gift which was in their hand, and they bowed down to the ground before him. They're bowing again. This is again fulfillment of the dream that Joseph had. Then he asked them about their welfare and said, is your old father well, of whom you spoke? Is he still alive? And they said, your servant, our father, is well. He is still alive. Then they bowed down again in homage. And as he raised his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, he said, is this your youngest brother, Benjamin? Is this your youngest brother? Oh, he doesn't name him, but he says it. Of whom you spoke to me? Then he said, may God be gracious to you, my son. Joseph then hurried out, for he was deeply stirred over his brother. And he looked for a place to weep, so he entered his chamber and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out and controlled himself and said, serve the meal. He's not ready to give up the ruse yet. He's not ready to tell them who he is, though he's feeling really close to that. We're going to see. May God be gracious to you, my son. Joseph hurried out. He was deeply stirred. Okay, we saw that. Then he washed his face and came out and controlled himself and said, serve the meal. Then they served him by himself and Joseph's brothers by themselves. And you wouldn't have had Egyptians eating with Hebrews like this. And Joseph's brothers by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat bread with the Hebrews. There you go. For that is an abomination to the Egyptians. Now, they were seated before him, from the firstborn according to his birthright to the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked at one another in astonishment. Now, why are they looking at each other in astonishment? Because they've been arranged. The table has been arranged, like at a nice meal, like a banquet or something, or perhaps a wedding reception. You'll have the names of where people are supposed to sit. He's got them all lined out where they're supposed to sit. How does he know the order of their birth? You might say, well, it's obvious. It wouldn't be too obvious. Some of these kids are born really close together. You can't do that. So they're wanting to know, how does he know? That's why they're astonished. Verse 34, then he took portions to them from his own table, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. So they drank freely with him. So they're happy now. Everybody's relaxed. Of course, notice that Joseph has given the youngest, Benjamin, 5 times. That's a big meal. I don't know how much they got, but he's treating them all pretty well here. So I'm imagining they got normal portions. And Benjamin's got 5 times? This is pretty amazing. Okay. So they were relieved here. They didn't know how to feel. When I was a child, let's say 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, my father was in full-time evangelism, traveling and speaking at churches all around America. And often he would come home on Wednesday night really late. And let's say that I had gotten into trouble with my mother earlier that day on Wednesday, or even worse, on Monday, and things still weren't better. And she said, I'm going to tell your father and he can handle this. Well, my father wears Western boots and has bad ankles. In fact, that's why he wears the Western boots. They kind of hold everything where it should be. And I would stay awake on Wednesday nights and I would listen, and I would hear my father come in the house. And then I would hear him stagger, walking, he's got a limp that he walks with, down to his bedroom. And I would hear the muffled tones of conversation. And I would always know if my mother had told him or not, whatever thing that I had done, because if she had, then I would hear those boots coming up the stairs. And I would know, you're about to get it, Braxton. You're in trouble. All right. So if I didn't hear those boots, then I would know that my mother hadn't told him. I wasn't getting in trouble. The relief that would wash over me after my father had been home for 10 minutes or so, and I knew, the relief. You thought you were going to get in trouble, and then you weren't. Have you ever been pulled over for a speeding ticket and the police officer lets you off the hook? Oh, the relief that comes over you when something like that happens. Don't speed, children, young people, or old people. But they were arranged according to their birth. We've covered that. He gives more to Benjamin, probably to see. The reason why he might give more to Benjamin is to see if they would be hostile to Benjamin getting more than them. Remember, they had issues with Joseph because Joseph seemed to be a favorite. He had the coat of many colors. They didn't get a coat of many colors. They had all this great stuff about him, and he had this dream that kind of made them look bad from their perspective and made him look good. And so they've got issues. Well, maybe Joseph's thinking, I can treat Benjamin better. Let's see if they do him like they did me. All right. Verse 40, or chapter 44, verse 1. Then he, let's see, is this where we're at? Yep. Then he commanded his house steward, saying, fill them in sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in the opening of his sack, and put my cup, the silver cup, in the opening of the sack of the youngest, and his money for the grain. And he did as Joseph had told him. So the steward is clearly in on this. Now, remember, I said we had one more trick up his sleeve, and quite literally here we've got a silver cup that would fit up his sleeve. And this is going to be put into Benjamin's bag. And we're going to see that. All right. Verse 3, as soon as it was light, the men were sent away, they with their donkeys. They had just left the city and were not far away when Joseph said to his house steward, up, follow the men. And when you overtake them, say to them, why have you repaid evil for good? Is this not that from which my Lord drinks, and which he indeed uses for divination? You have done wrong in doing this. Okay, so what's this business about a divination, a silver cup used for divination? Well, the IVP Bible Background Commentary has this to say about verse 5 here with the divination cup. It says, quote, the cup that Joseph plants in Benjamin's sack is identified as being used for divination, Just as tea leaves are read today, the ancients read omens by means of liquid in cups. One mechanism involved the pouring of oil onto water to see what shapes it would take, called Liconomancy. More popular methods of divination used everyday occurrences, configurations of the entrails of sacrificed animals, or the movements of the heavenly bodies. Liconomancy was used in the time of Joseph, as is attested by several old Babylonian omen texts concerned with the various possible configuration of the oil and their interpretation. So we have extra biblical evidence of this being used during the time of Joseph, according to the IVP background commentary. Another technique, hydromancy, made its observations from the reflections in the water itself. Not enough is known about Egyptian divination techniques to offer more specific information. But in these early periods, typically only people of status had access to divination procedures. Now, here's the thing. This silver cup was used for divination among pagans. Now, you might think, why does Joseph have this thing? He shouldn't be involved in pagan divination practices, right? Well, I have no reason to think he did. It never comes up in the story that way. And in fact, notice how little he seems to care about possibly losing this silver cup. From Joseph's perspective, this was just a nonsense trinket, but it would serve as a great test for the brothers. Verse 6, so he overtook them and spoke these words to them. And they said to him, why does my Lord say such words as these? Far be it from your servants to do such a thing. Behold, the money which we found in the opening of our sacks, we brought back to you from the land of Canaan. How then could we steal silver or gold from your Lord's house? With whomever of your servant it is found, he shall die, and we also shall be my Lord's slaves. Now notice what they've just said. They've just said, no, we don't have this silver thing, this silver divination cup. And guess what? We're so confident in that if you find it in one of our bags, that guy should die and the rest of us will be your slaves. Now, I'm not the first to point out this is a little, what do we say? Jumping the gun, getting the cart before the horse, something like that. Plug in the appropriate analogy. The reality is they have been privy to their bags being filled with their own money before, and they can't explain that. So maybe don't say so readily that you don't have this cup. For all you know, it might be there, right? And don't say, kill the guy who has it. I mean, good night. We're not to that point yet. But it's true that whenever you are accused of something you didn't do, a lot of times the response is immediately, wait a minute, I didn't do that, and maybe that's what's going on here. But verse 10 says, so he said, now let it indeed be according to your words. He with whom it is found shall be my slave, but the rest of you shall be considered innocent. So in other words, he says, no, what's going to happen is if I find this thing, that guy's going to be my slave. Is that right? Now let it be done, indeed be according to your words. He with whom it is found shall be my slave. Well, is that according to their words? Go back and look at what it says according to their words. Behold, the money which we found in the opening of our sacks, we have brought back to you from the land of Canaan. How then could we do this? With whomever of your servants it is found, he shall die, and we also shall be my Lord's slaves. Well, this guy says, well, let it be according to your words. But what he means is, he with whom it is found shall be my slave, but the rest of you shall be considered innocent. So even though he says, it could be a bit confusing, even though he says, it'll be as you say, he changes it up a little bit. Then they hurried, each man lowering his sack to the ground. Each man opened his sack, and he searched, beginning with the oldest, ending with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Can you imagine as they got closer to Benjamin, perhaps they were starting to think, like I've told people before, like I have a tendency toward anxiety, and like I don't think I have some sort of horrible blood disease, but if I knew that my blood was being tested for a particular horrible blood disease, I might get a little nervous when I know that the doctor's about to come in with the results, even though I know I have no reason to believe I have one, right? Well, even if for some irrational human reason like this, when they get close to Benjamin's sack, you might think, are they going to find something in Benjamin's sack? Just imagine if they found one in Benjamin's sack. What would that mean? We lose Benjamin. And that's the only thing we said we were definitely going to do is bring back Benjamin to Joseph. And you would imagine these kind of thoughts. But this is the moment where we'll find out Now think about how clever this is. This is the moment where we're going to find out whether another young brother is going to be discarded as a slave to Egypt. They could say, in this case, it's very similar to the story to what happened to Joseph. Ultimately, the end game is going to be the same. You lost a brother to Egypt. You're about to lose another brother to Egypt. And they can. They have, in fact, in this situation, these brothers, they have a pretty good story. Hey, we didn't do this. We legitimately did not steal this silver divination cup. But it looks like Benjamin did, so take Benjamin. We'll go back to Jacob and say, listen, you were wrong about Benjamin's integrity, apparently, because if you had good thoughts about his integrity, because he stole this silver. We didn't try. It's not on us. But that's not what happens. They could have done that, but that's not what happens. These men have changed. Verse 13, then they tore their clothes in grief, and when each man had loaded his donkey, they returned to the city. So they don't go on to Jacob now. They go back to Joseph in Egypt. When Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, he was still there, and they fell down to the ground before him. Joseph said to them, what is this thing that you have done? Do you not know that a man who is like me can indeed practice divination? So Judah said, well, what can we say to my Lord? What words can we speak, and how can we justify ourselves? God has found out the guilt of your servants. Behold, we are my Lord's slaves, both we and the one in whose possession the cup has been found. But he said, far be it from me to do this. The man in whose possession the cup has been found, he shall be my slave. But as for you, go up in peace to your father. So Joseph is testing them. Are they going to do what they did to me? Are they still the same men that they were when they did that to me? Then Judah approached him and said, oh, my Lord, may your servant please speak a word in my Lord's ears. And do not be angry with your servant, for you are equal to Pharaoh. My Lord asked his servant, saying, have you a father or a brother? And we said to my Lord, we have an old father and a little boy born in our father's old age. Now his brother is dead. So he alone is left of his mother, and his father loves him. Then you said to your servants, bring him down to me so that I may set my eyes on him. But we said to my Lord, the boy cannot leave his father. For if he should leave his father would die. You said to your servants, however, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you will not see my face again. By the way, as we go into this section, one of my favorite Bible teachers, as you know, is a guy named Steve Gregg, who teaches a couple of classes for us here at Trinity. And as he teaches through this, he gets choked up. Now, I don't think I have that reaction. I guess we're about to find out. But that speaks to the powerful. He says, I'm not even an emotional guy, but when I read this, I can't teach through this or even read this text out loud without getting choked up. And he says, I think it's because of the repentance and the changed heart that we see here. But verse 22 says, we said to my Lord, the boy cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father would die. You said to your servants, however, unless the youngest brother comes down with you, you will not see my face again. So it came about when we went up to your servant, my father. We told him the words of my Lord, and our father said, go back, buy us a little food. But we said, we cannot go down. If our youngest brother is with us, then we will go down, for we cannot see, then we will go down, if our brother's with us. For we cannot see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. Then your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons, and the one left me, and I said, surely he is torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since. If you also take this one from me, and harm happens to him, you will bring my gray hair down to Sheol in sorrow. So now when I come to your servant, my father, and the boy is not with us, since our father's life is so attached to the boy's life, when he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die. So your servants will bring the gray hair of your servant. Let's see. So your servants will bring the gray hair of your servant, our father, down to Sheol in sorrow, if that happens, basically. For your servant accepted responsibility for the boy from my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then my father can let me take the blame forever. So now, please let your servant remain as a slave to my Lord instead of the boy, and let the boy go up with his brothers. For how shall I go up to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear what I may see the evil that would overtake my father." Then Joseph could not control himself in front of everyone standing before him, and he shouted, "Have everyone leave me." That's the first verse of chapter 45. And that is very powerful. Joseph couldn't handle it anymore. So there was no one with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. Then he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard about it. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. I am Joseph." This is the moment we've all been waiting for. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were terrified in his presence. Now imagine this scene. Imagine this scene. This is the moment. Suddenly they hear this. We know it's coming, but the brothers are just floored by this thing. This is like Hollywood doesn't have writing this good. Sometimes truth is stranger than fiction, right? Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come closer to me." And they came closer, and he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold to Egypt. Now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me ahead of you to save lives. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. So God sent me ahead of you to ensure for you a remnant on the earth, and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Now, therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God, and he has made me a father to Pharaoh and Lord of all his household and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, 'This is what your son Joseph says. God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Do not delay, for you shall live in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, and you and your children and your grandchildren and your flocks and your herds and all that you have. There I will also provide for you. For there are still 5 years of famine to come, and you and your household and all that you have would be impoverished. Behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see, that it is my mouth which is speaking to you. Now you must tell my father of all my splendor in Egypt and all that you have seen, and you must hurry and bring my father down here." Then he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept. And Benjamin wept on his neck. And he kissed all his brothers and wept on them. And afterward his brother talked with him. This is the relief. The relief comes flooding. The relief comes flooding. Until now, it has been a roller coaster of stress for these brothers, but now it has come. And this reminds me, one moment of great relief in my life not too long ago was about a year ago. We had a condo property that we owned in Nashville, not because we're rich people, but because we moved to Evansville, Indiana before we sold that property, and that move happened in February of 2008. And for those of you old enough to have been conscious of what was happening in the world about that time, that was when we had the financial collapse of 2008. And so we couldn't sell our property, and so we started renting it. But we sold it in November. But before that, water had flooded the unit. And we just had like this catastrophic insurance that just handled what are called acts of God. And we were very concerned that that might not cover this. And we were concerned about that for weeks, real stress, because this had the potential to destroy us financially. But yet, we prayed about it, begged God for resolution. And as a result, the people who lived diagonally above us had a busted pipe is what caused this. And they had insurance that would cover it. And so we didn't have to cover that. And the relief that washed over us was just so great. But obviously there's greater reliefs. I mean, sometimes felt in a very small amount of time. You lose your child in the mall, and then suddenly there they are, and all that stress is gone. Relief is such a powerful thing. We should thank God when we receive that. Everything good comes from the Father, and we should thank him when he answers our prayers and not forget to thank him. Verse 16, now when the news was heard in Pharaoh's house that Joseph's brothers had come, it pleased Pharaoh. And now we're talking about Pharaoh now, not Joseph. Pharaoh hears about this. It pleased Pharaoh and his servants. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, do this, load your livestock and go to the land of Canaan and take your father and your household and come to me, and I'll give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you will eat the fat of the land. Now you are ordered. Do this. Take wagons from the land of Egypt. Take your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father and come. And do not concern yourselves with your property, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. Then the sons of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them wagons according to the command of Pharaoh, and gave them provisions for their journey. To each of them he gave changes of garments, but to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of garments. And to his father he sent the following: 10 male donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and sustenance for his father on the journey. Notice that Benjamin gets 5 times as much clothes as any changes of clothes. The average person in this day might have only had 1 change of clothes, so that you could wear something else while you're washing your change of clothes. And you can wear that while you're washing the other change of clothes. It just wasn't common to have whole, these big wardrobes like we're used to now. And yet Benjamin's being given 5 changes of clothing. This could be like being given a lot of money, perhaps a house or something. It would be equivalent. Steve Gregg, I think, said it'd be like giving several cars. This is what it'd be like. This would be expensive. He's still perhaps wanting to, shower Benjamin with these things. It shows Jacob that Benjamin is loved. It allows the brothers to continue getting used to being fine with a brother getting more than them. And they should be fine with it because the mercy they've been shown. So, verse 24, he sent his brothers away, and as they departed, he said to them, do not quarrel on the journey. Then they went up from Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to their father Jacob, and they told him, saying, Joseph is still alive, and indeed he is ruler over the land of Egypt. But he was stunned, for he did not believe them. When they told him all the words of Joseph that he had spoken to them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him, then the spirit of their father Jacob revived. Then Israel said, it is enough. My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. This is the kind of big moment in the story, too. Obviously the big moment is the big reveal. This is part of the big reveal. What follows what follows this kind of climactic moment is administrative details about blessings from the father to the sons and some other details. But we're going to continue with this. But I want you to see here this mercy, this relief, and how Jacob ends up getting all of his sons back. And now his quality of life surpasses anything he knew before. Chapter 46. So Israel set out with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, here I am. Now notice, when God speaks to people, we saw this, I think I pointed it out in the last one, in the last lecture on this, but in Exodus chapter 3, when Moses encounters the burning bush, in Isaiah chapter 6, verses 5 and following. And then here, when people encounter God, the response is, among righteous men, or I think men that wish to be righteous, trying to serve God, here I am. That's the same words used in each. Verse 3, then he said, I am God, the God of your father, and do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also assuredly bring you up again, and Joseph will close your eyes. Now, the thing that's interesting about this is, if you know the story, Jacob is the 3rd generation that has been interested in Egypt for one reason or another. And this hasn't always been the greatest thing. And so Jacob, it's good that he hears, no, this is a part of the plan. Go along, go to Egypt, and it's okay. Verse 8, now these are the names of the sons of Israel who went to Egypt, Jacob and his sons. Wait, did we get through all this? No, I didn't. Verse 5. Then Jacob left Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried their father Jacob and their little ones and the wives in the wagons, which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. They also took their livestock and their possessions, which they had acquired in the land of Canaan, and came to Egypt. Jacob and all his descendants with him, his sons and his grandsons with him, his daughters and his granddaughters, and all his descendants he brought with him to Egypt. Okay, now these are the names of the sons of Israel who went to Egypt, Jacob and his sons. Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, and the sons of Reuben, Hanok, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. Now, there are four listed here, four sons of Reuben. And we'll recall that Reuben, in chapter 42, had said to his father when he was trying to get him to let Benjamin go with him back to Egypt, he said, you can kill two of my sons, or you can kill my two sons, or something like that. We know here that he had at least two sons at that time. It is possible at that time in chapter 42, perhaps those are the only sons he had. He could have had twins, or he could have had a couple of sons perhaps in the span of, let's say, a year. That wouldn't have been impossible. At least, a little over a year, obviously, but you could make it work. It wasn't exactly a year. We don't know. Verse 10, and the sons of Simeon, Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, and Shaul, the son of a Canaanite woman. And the sons of Levi, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. And the sons of Judah, Onan, Shelah, Perez, and Zerah. Notice there's a note here, but and Onan died in the land of Canaan. And you'll have to refer back to the story of Judah to understand that. It's in this series. And the sons of Perez were Hezron and Hamul. And the sons of Issachar, Tola, Puvah, Job, and Shimron. Some have tried to argue that this Job is the Job from the book of Job, but this is unlikely. And the sons of Zebulon, Sered, Elon, and Jalil. These are the sons of Leah, whom she bore to Jacob in Paddan Aram. With his daughter Dinah, all his sons and his daughters numbered 33. And the sons of Gad, Ziphion, Haggi, Shuni, Esbon, Eri, Aradi, and Arali. And the sons of Asher, Imnah, Ishva, Ishvi, Beriah, and their sister Sarah. And the sons of Beriah, Heber, and Melchiel. These are the sons of Zilpah, whom Laban gave to his daughter Leah, and she bore to Jacob these 16 persons, the sons of Jacob's wife Rachel, Joseph, and Benjamin. Now to Joseph in the land of Egypt were born Manasseh and Ephraim from Asenath, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On, bore to him, and the sons of Benjamin, Bela, Becher, Ashbel, Gerah, Naaman, Ehi, Rosh, Mupim, and Hupim. Maybe Mupim and Hupim were little buddies. Maybe they're twins, maybe something like that. And Ard. These are the sons of Rachel who were born. In fact, if you're a woman out there or a man who is going to be the parent of twins, here are some names: Mupim and Hupim. Mup and Hup, maybe. These were the 14 persons in all. Let's see, did I get through? These are the sons of Rachel who were born to Jacob. There were 14 persons in all. And the sons of Dan, Hushim, and the sons of Naphtali, Jaziel, Guni, Jezer, and Shilem. These are the sons of Bilhah, whom Laban gave to his daughter Rachel, and she bore these to Jacob. There were 7 persons in all. All the people belonging to Jacob who came to Egypt, his direct descendants, not including the wives of Jacob's sons, were 66 persons in all. And the sons of Joseph who were born to him in Egypt were 2. All the people of the house of Jacob who came to Egypt were 70. Now Jacob sent, we're almost done here. Now Jacob sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to guide him to Goshen. And they came into the land of Goshen, and Joseph prepared his chariot and went up to Goshen to meet his father Israel. As soon as he appeared to him, Joseph threw himself on his neck and wept on his neck a long time. Then Israel said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face, that you are still alive." But Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, "I will go up and tell Pharaoh, and will say to him, my brothers and my father's household, who were in the land of Canaan, have come to me. And the men are shepherds, for they have been keepers of livestock, and they have brought their flocks and their herds, all that they have. When Pharaoh calls for you and says, 'What is your occupation?' you shall say, 'Your servants have been keepers of livestock since our youth, even until now, both we and our fathers, so that you may live in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians.'" So the idea is here is if you say you're shepherds, they're going to give you this land where you can be on your own out here, Goshen. It's going to be awesome. Chapter 47, we're going to take very quickly, and then we'll be done for the day. But it says, then Joseph went in and told Pharaoh and said, my father and my brothers and their flocks and their herds and all that they have come out of the land of Canaan, and behold, they are in the land of Goshen. And he took 5 men from among his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to his brothers, what is your occupation? So they said to Pharaoh, your servants are shepherds, both we and our fathers. They also said to Pharaoh, we have come to reside in the land, for there is no pleasure of your servants' flocks, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. Now, therefore, please let your servants live in the land of Goshen. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is at your disposal. Settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Let them live in the land of Goshen. And if you know any capable men among them, then put them in charge of my livestock. This Pharaoh is really being cooperative here. Then Joseph brought his father Jacob and presented him to Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Now that Jacob blessed Pharaoh may show some religious or moral respect that Pharaoh might have for Jacob, that he would let him bless him like that. But this is an entertaining discussion here. It's very short. Verse 8, between Jacob, old Jacob and Pharaoh. Well, is he old? That's the question. Pharaoh said to Jacob, how many years have you lived? So Jacob said to Pharaoh, the years of my living abroad are 130. Few and unpleasant have been the years of my life. Nor have they attained the years my fathers lived during the days of their living abroad. Now this I've always thought was kind of funny because, okay, it's true. He hasn't lived as long as Isaac or Abraham. Abraham lived 175 years. Isaac lived 180 years. It's going to turn out that he's going to live 147 years, but we're going to see that he's going to live another 17 years beyond this. But the point, I just think it's funny from our perspective that Jacob says, I'm a man of few years. I've only lived 130. I mean, I'm only 130 years old. Yeah, that's such a short life. But Jacob blessed, verse 10, so Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from his presence. Now Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them property in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had ordered. Now remember that it says in the land of Ramses. Joseph also provided his father and his brothers and all his father's household with food, according to the number of their little ones. Now, I'm not an Egyptologist, but I'm going to refer here to the Bible Backgrounds, IVP Bible Background Commentary. It says about this phrase, district of Ramses or land of Ramses. It says, an equation is made here between the district of Ramses and the land of Goshen. This northeastern section of the Delta region was known to be inhabited by Semites and is the center of Hyksos activity during the 18th to 16th centuries BC. It will also be equated with the Tanis district, where the storehouse cities of Pithom and Ramses were said to have been constructed by the Hebrew slaves in Exodus chapter 1, verse 11. Pharaoh Ramses II, who did build and expand cities in this region during the mid-13th century BC, may be anachronistically referred to in this phrase. So there you know a little bit more about what it means by the district. The point is he's giving them a great chunk of land that is going to be great for them. Verse 13. Now there was no food in all the land because the famine was very severe. So that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. And Joseph collected all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan in payment for the grain which they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. When the money was all spent in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph saying, give us food, for why should we die in your presence? For our money is gone. Then Joseph said, give up your livestock and I will give you food for your livestock, since your money is gone. So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for the horses and the flocks and the herd and the donkeys, and he fed them with food in exchange for all their livestock that year. But when that year ended, they came to him the next year and said to him, we will not hide from my lord the fact that our money is all spent, and the livestock are my lord's. There is nothing left for my lord except our bodies and our lands. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for food, and we and our land will be slaves to Pharaoh. So give us seed so that we may live and not die, and that the land may not be desolate. So here they are coming, and Joseph's got to make a decision about this. So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for every Egyptian sold his field, because the famine was severe upon them. So the land became Pharaoh's, and as for the people, he relocated them to the cities from one end to Egyptians' border to the other. Only the land of the priests he did not buy, because the priests had an allotment from Pharaoh, and they lived off the atonement or the allotment which Pharaoh gave them, so that the priests didn't have to pay these special taxes. They could still keep their stuff. Therefore, they did not sell their land. Then Joseph said to the people, "Behold, today I have purchased you and your land for Pharaoh. Now here is seed for you, and you may sow the land. At the harvest you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh." This is 20% again. And 4/5 shall be your own for seed of the field and for your food and for those of your household and as food for your little ones. So they said, "You have saved our lives." Now you might think this sounds terrible because he's made slaves out of them, but not slaves in the sense that you want to think about, not in the sense that the Israelites are later slaves in Egypt hundreds of years later. No, they were still able to conduct their lives and live, sensible lives. The problem is now they've been moved into cities. This is a problematic thing. Well, one of the things that's bad about a city situation, I live in a city, but the thing at this period in history about living in a city was that meant you weren't going to be out there, you weren't going to be able to survive yourself off the land such that you weren't reliant on the government for these kinds of things. Now you're completely reliant on the government with this. And this is not maybe the best situation, because now you're dependent completely on the government. Now, it was okay for them in this situation because Joseph was going to handle things rightly. He was listening to God and doing what God would have him to do. But we don't always have godly leadership, and we don't have godly governments. And of course, even in the case of Egypt, it would ultimately become the case that they didn't have godly leadership, and then all of this could be abused. But the arrangement was not oppressive. They were a completely socialized state here, and this led them to all basically becoming dependent on the government. But this is happening in America to a certain degree. Do you know how many farmers there are in America today? Out of the population, 1.3% of Americans are farmers. That used to be in the 90 percentile in the past, 100 years ago or whatever. But see, because of this, that's one of the reasons people in cities can't create their own survival. When I was outside of Detroit, Michigan, a couple of times speaking at a church called Merriman Road Baptist Church, it was in a place called Garden City, which is a suburb of Detroit. And Garden City was one of Henry Ford's ideas, that we would give everyone an acre of land, because that's what people had said, an acre of land is all you need. Give them an acre of land, put their house at the very front of that would be on the street. So it would look like a normal everyday neighborhood, but behind the house would be this tract of land where they could grow crops and even livestock. And many people did that, but ultimately people stopped doing that and just continued to function, pretty well like Americans do. But at the time, that was part of the idea, was that people should be able to, raise their own food, or at least a lot of their own food. But 20% was what people were already giving the government in Egypt during the days of when they were taking of the harvest. And so this wouldn't be entirely out of line for what they were used to. And notice that it says "to this day." Did you see that? It's these laws were put here kind of to this day. Well, to who? What does that mean? When? When was it still to this day? Well, it would have made sense if if Moses wrote this, that it meant even in his day, which would have been hundreds of years later. Verse 27, now Israel lived in the land of Egypt in Goshen, and they acquired property in it and were fruitful and became very numerous. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years. So the length of Jacob's life was 147 years. When the time for Israel to die drew near, he called his son Joseph, and we'll end with this, and said to him, "Please, if I found favor in your sight, please place your hand under my thigh now and deal with me." We talked about this with Jacob and Esau and Isaac and the whole thing there. But this is just a part of how oaths were made back then, or blessings were given, or whatever it is. Place your hand under my thigh now and deal with me in kindness and faithfulness. Please do not bury me in Egypt, but when I lie down with my fathers, you shall carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place. And he said, I will do as you have said. And he said, swear to me. So he swore to him. Then Israel bowed in worship at the head of the bed. As we close this out, I would say that it all worked out here. We see this amazing way that God worked all of this together to bless Jacob. Everything is restored. It's a powerful, powerful moment. But there was great fear. And, this relief from fear is a powerful thing. People often think about the idea of fear as something, the idea that you should fear God is a bad thing. Well, there's two ways that people can fear God. Believers should fear God, but for an entirely different reason than unbelievers should fear God. Believers should fear the disciplining hand, perhaps, of their God, but also fear disappointing their God. But for unbelievers, the fear is of judgment. But fear is a powerful thing, and we all have to face it. And we all find ourselves on our knees crying out to our God. Several years ago, when I was a kid, my father, our family would watch movies together, and occasionally we'd watch a scary movie. And that scary movie might be The Mummy or Frankenstein or Dracula or something like that. And I'd be scared, and I would often sit there in the chair with my father as we'd watch this as I was a little guy. And as that monster, it took a lot to scare me because I grew up in the 1980s with Madonna and Michael Jackson, so it really takes a lot to scare me. But I would watch this monster do these frightening things, and eventually I would get scared, and I'd scoot further and further back in the chair with my father. And at some point in the night, you know how it is, you'll wake up, and somewhere before you roll over, hug your pillow, and go back to sleep, you think about the monster you saw that night. And you don't move, because he's in the room. And the more you think about the monster you saw that night, you think about the one that you saw the week before that, and the one the week before that, and the one the week before that. And before it's all over, I had decided that the mummy was underneath the bed, Frankenstein was on the other side of the dresser, and that scary shadow outside the window was Dracula. So here's what you got to do. You on the edge of your bed just as far as you can scoot without falling off. And then you jump a good 2 feet. Now you got to do that because the mummy's got this big old long arm he can reach out and grab you with. So you get out in the hallway and you make it down to your parents' bedroom. And I just stay in there at the foot of the bed. And finally I'd hear my father say, "What's wrong with you, boy?" And I'd say, and by the way, at that point I might think about going back in with the mummy. But finally I'd muster up the courage to say to my father, "I'm scared. I'm scared." And he'd say, "Well, climb on up here." And somehow, in bed with your father or your mother there, all your fears are gone. It doesn't make any sense because whatever's in your bedroom is going to make short work out of your parents. But seriously, being there with your mother and father is all your fears are gone in the best circumstances. But as I've gotten older, there are still things that keep me up at night. There's still fears I have. There's still things that terrify me. And I still find myself wanting to crawl up into my father's arms. But now, it's not my earthly father. Now, it's my heavenly Father. And whatever's going on in your life, whether it's a difficulty in a relationship, difficulty with your kids, the financial situation, political upheaval, war, whatever's going on, it may still be bad, but it won't be as bad. There's less to fear if you can call the God of all creation your Father. Do you fear him as a believer? You have a reverence for him and you fear the disciplining hand. You fear disappointing him. But unbelievers have to fear God for an entirely different reason. And that is because they face judgment and they are not in Christ. And I'm begging you, whoever you are, as a believer, repent of your sin. Unbeliever, repent of your sin. So that you can have that relief and experience that mercy.